What does bad parenting look like? Well, who knows, because somehow I've avoided becoming a parent despite my college years. Big ups to the man upstairs. That being said, I'd like to think I could probably spot a really dumb idea or held belief when I see it. And that will be the entire theme of this video. Just me straight up dunking on the father in this movie for one of the most idiotic statements regarding his offspring that I've ever heard in my life. In a woodland area, after a small family consisting of a dad who hands out terrible life lessons, a mom who was addicted to pain pills, and a daughter who just has a really poor sense of planning skills, this dynamic trio would go out to a yard sale in order to look around to help furnish their house. Once arriving, they would find the most creepy looking bear I've ever seen in my life, and of course, instantly become enamored with it. Once bringing it home, however, it was clear that even though the bear itself looked like it was spawned out of the pits of hell, something inside of it may have been way worse. A parasite would exit and begin its infection of a new family. So in today's episode, we will be talking about this parasite, what it currently is doing to everyone's meat suit, and ultimately why its plan would likely not work. So alright, let's get to it. So here's my usual blah blah blah. Up on screen, you guys will see a timestamp. If you want to bypass the summary and head there, we will get to the actual parasite, which we'll be discussing. But I warn you, you gotta see this dad. It's something to behold. But for all others, let's talk about why when a teddy bear's crotch opens up, releasing the horrors of something unknown, your first instinct should probably be to yeet that thing into oblivion and run like you have a purpose. So we open up our story at a garage sale, which, if you aren't familiar with those, basically you bring all of your crap out on the front lawn, spend hours doing it, sell like a third of your stuff, move the rest back into the garage, and wait until the next time you move to throw it all away. Classic. But as the shop pans by, we get a view of a mountain of stuffed animals with the old teddy bear sitting up top. As the family enters the driveway, the mom is instantly saying that this isn't a good idea. I mean, what's wrong with buying other people's stuff? That will invariably become your own junk? Kinda sounds like a win-win. But we get some exposition on how they just moved into the mom's uncle's house as he passed away. Meanwhile, the owner stares on without saying anything, definitely normal. And then finally, Meg finds the bear. At this point, the old man comes over and starts telling her how it's a special bear, and also starts body language-wise acting really weird. Beth motions for Jack to come over, and he does, and the guy says that the bear is free for her. Well, inside of the domicile, things are absolutely terrible. A girl shakily walks back over to another person sitting in a chair as she coughs up bugs. The other family has gotten completely shreked by these things. Okay, so now we're getting to just witness the otherworldly levels of father wisdom being dropped. We get a conversation between Beth and Jack. Basically, she was crushing on some substances pretty hard, so they moved out here to sort of restart. Meanwhile, Meg is playing with Sir Creeps a lot in the wooden playground. The thing is making noise, weird because there's no batteries in there. So back to Beth and Jack. Okay, so presumably Beth had to lie to her family to keep her habit a secret, right? Well, Jack ends up apologizing to her while she's apologizing, and he says, "Beth, you're one of the most honest people I know." Dude, what? Isn't the act of hiding something a lie? But don't worry, this dude's got a ton of these moments. You know, those nobody would ever say this in real life, so kind of strap in for that. So as Jack continues to butter up Beth hardcore, Meg ends up running into the woods after listening to her teddy bear, and we're going to talk about why this makes very little sense later. As she holds the bear, Teddy wants to be more than friends. The parents begin looking for her, and as they do, Jack says just this brilliant thing, "Yeah, well, life will teach her some lessons." Dad, you're supposed to be teaching her about the dangerous lessons so that life doesn't have to. Is that not the whole point of parenting? Like, if you're a child running around and your parents grab you before you go and poke a tiger, was life supposed to teach you that poking tigers was bad? All I can say is friggin' brilliant. Anyhow, back at the old garage sale homestead, we see the old man is getting ready to take out the woman in his house. Looks like maybe she was the nest. See, I said it. And as Meg lets out a scream, her parents find her bleeding from the mouth and begin screeching rather than immediately calling 911. I know I'm dunking on the parents, but it's just that kind of episode. Stick around, it'll be fun. So now we get a bunch of creepy drawings, which if you didn't know, that's how kids communicate actually when they can't seem to do it verbally. So always pay attention to those. And if you want something that's fairly interesting relating to that, it is hypothesized now that cave paintings may have actually just been bored cave children and that the parents were not responsible for it. I mean, it makes sense because unless you are an artist, like as you grow up, adults really don't find themselves drawing too much. But as a kid, most of us did. So there's your random hypothesis for the day. Okay, so like 6 weeks later, it's now Christmas time. And for some reason, bowls of sugar are everywhere. As Meg types on her tablet, she still has this creepy bear that was covered in blood from earlier, and why the parents made a point to grab that thing, deep clean it, and then give it back to her is beyond me. So we jump over to the parents currently at a dinner date with one another. After these 6 weeks, they've noticed that Meg has started to become more dependent on them, constantly hitting them up from the tablet asking where they are. In fact, you can't hear it, but in this scene, their phone is chiming like every 3 seconds. And also, this sounds like a real restaurant, so they had to increase the phone noise by a lot just to hear. It's actually kind of annoying. So Beth wants Meg to start child therapy because something appears wrong, and Jack agrees, because that's what he does. Although everyone could use therapy, and that's just for real. Also, Meg is talking to the bear, and presumably it's talking back to her. And as Beth is taking things real personally right now, the dad says she's trying to find ways to stay home. Beth gets upset about it, so dinner date is ruined. We now meet Marissa, Meg's babysitter. As she goes and tries to take the tablet away from Meg for the night, they get into a bit of a tug of war with the device before Meg finally relents. It appears as though Marissa is Beth's friend, and she tells Meg, "Night night, don't let the bed bugs bite," and then goes to talk to the parents. She reports that she's becoming obsessed with the tablet and that Meg appears to be sad for some reason. As Beth goes to check on Meg, she apparently has a ton of candy under her pillow, which I'm not gonna lie to you is actually pretty normal for kids. But that night, we get what I used to do at 3 a.m. So you guys remember being kids and you didn't want to like wake up your parents abruptly, so you would just sort of stand by their bed and wait for them to wake up, and it would scare the absolute living hell out of them? Hopefully that wasn't just me, but my number will likely come up on that, because if I used to do it, there's no way my kids in the future won't be giving me a heart attack in the same way. But after standing there and saying nothing, she goes back to her room and sits there like a creepazoid till Beth comes in to check on her. Pulling out of her trance-like state, she hands Fozbear back to her and she goes to bed. Now we enter Beth's dreamlike state. Walking through a snowy forest, she ends up spotting her precious little gumdrop up in a tree in some sort of nest before she's showered with a literal bucket of blood. I mean, you can even see the pore pattern. God, I love this movie. But she hears clicks in her dream, which is interesting. Beth requests that Jack calls out of work the next morning because Meg is sleepwalking, but he declines because, I mean, he has to make money to support the family unit, more so when, I mean, there's thousands of bugs to feed as well. So Beth takes Meg to a child psychologist where she begins telling him her symptoms. She's hungry all the time, her stomach hurts, but rather than listen, he does the wrong thing and tells her what he thinks is the problem. And he basically says, "Oh, you're just worried." Yeah, that's not what you're supposed to do. Beth brings up that she's becoming strangely attached to her and the bear. The therapist says there's nothing unusual about this behavior. Not so sure about that one, my man. The therapist does the right thing and recommends a competent psychiatrist, suggesting that she may have anxiety. Meg at this point attaches to Beth's arm. She's not trying to go to class, and I feel that back when I was a kid. She was having a tough time listening, and as Beth tries to tell her to go to class, she eventually just has to like bail out like a bad date. We now have this interesting interaction between a girl named Billy and Meg as she is antagonized. Meg pushes her as the bug leg comes out, and eventually Meg does go to class. At dinner, Meg appears to just want to eat sugar. The parents are also kind of like tiptoeing around her. Just for your information, you're supposed to be your kid's parent, not their friend at that age. You can be friends when they get older, but these parents don't appear to enforce anything, so now it just seems like she's defiant, but in reality, the bugs don't play along the same social lines as humanity. Later that night, as Jack is knocking back a few in the old woodworking shop, oh, I forgot to mention, they both have problems. Beth was on the pain pills, and Jack was on the old Jack and Coke. But as Beth checks out her stomach for reasons unknown, Meg goes outside after listening to the bear. Going to the wood shop, Jack looks over and sees her. She then raises the bear as something exits it and enters Jack. The next morning, Meg is putting a ton of sugar on her food. Can't fault her for that at that age. But Beth gets a call about a job. As she turns around, Meg tells her not to leave her. Meanwhile, Meg later isn't looking too good in class. Then back at home, Beth straight up finds a puddle of blood in the woodworking shop, doesn't investigate it. I mean, I guess that's normal. I mean, there's no cars parked in there, so you know it's not trans fluid. But as the therapist talks to Meg, having pulled her out of class, she makes this clicking noise. He asks her if she made that sound, to which she says she didn't, but she knows that she did. She ended up pulling some of the skin off his arm in the process of holding on, which appears to have been a struggle for control. Ooh, the implications. Later, as Beth talks to Jack about the job proposal, he starts saying that she shouldn't leave because she needs to focus on Meg. She's a little confused, as this should be a good thing for both of them. So he starts getting frisky in order to stop her from leaving. I mean, is it really gonna be that large of a delay? Also, the freaking bear is watching them go at it. The next morning, Beth goes to check on Meg and then finds all of her stuffed animals have been split open, so that's a good sign. As she goes to drink coffee after, she spills some, goes to clean up, slips on the bear on the stairs, and then smashes her head into the ground. So now we begin seeing the more malicious side of this infection. Well, I guess technically it's more malicious. Jack awakens Beth and says they took her to the doctor, unconscious, and he prescribed her pain pills. So first, I'm pretty sure a doctor would have kept the patient there. Second, with her history, he definitely would have not prescribed pain pills out of the gate. But luckily, Beth has a head wound, so her brain is currently scrambled. She attempts attempts to stop him from giving it to her, but she relents, finally trusting her family. So now Beth is feeling pretty good. As she falls asleep, she has another dream hearing something like a cicada. She grabs the bear as Meg says something and then runs off into the woods. Meg is coughing up something and Jack is kind of getting creepy with Marissa. And then as Beth looks at the bear, she sees Meg has gotten got and is laying on the ground. Waking up, Jack is sitting there like a total weirdo. So now this is turning into a misery situation where he won't let her out of bed because he loves her. Jack gets a text and then bounces out. As he goes and sits on the couch next to Marissa, who has also gotten got by the bug Boogaloo, the therapist has called Jack in order to get in touch with Beth. He ends up going to the therapy office and brought the bear with him. I would be a little weirded out by that, but also so is the therapist. He talks to Jack about how Meg is missing school, and Jack retorts that Beth is sick. The therapist then says that he has to file an incident report because of the physical damage to his arm. Jack then threatens the therapist, saying that they were alone in the office together, so maybe that's why Meg hurt him. Jack breaks down before slamming the therapist's head into the desk and infecting him. Man, I'll tell you what, that went sideways pretty fast. Also, the bear is really starting to gross me out. Now, basically everyone around the family and in the family has now been infected by these things. Bug Marissa begins vying for Meg's love now. Also understand this is the bugs talking at this point. Human consciousness is quasi taking a back seat, but they are basically just discussing how to get the mother to stay entirely. My question is, why don't they just infect her while she's passed out? No idea. So at this point, the family is on an exclusive sugar diet and living in squalor. Marissa puts some pain pills in the OJ and then brings it to Beth as Meg delivers the package. Also, nobody in the family is looking healthy, probably because all they're eating is sugar. Beth attempts to get up and ask Meg for help, but Meg pushes her back down as Marissa enters. Marissa ends up basically scolding Beth and tells her to give her what she needs and that she should do her job. That's not what you say. And, just being very vague but threatening stuff. Marissa then says that she should ask about Meg's notebook as it's pretty inspiring. Basically, it's just creepy as all get out. As Beth flips through, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not very inspired. Basically, the teddy bear is exiting through a hell portal and the drawings continue to get worse. As Beth attempts to make Meg laugh, it doesn't work, much like my dad jokes, and she decides that she should just continue on. Beth then hears a click as Meg just sort of zones out. Beth now says that she needs to cut back on those pills because it's really making her foggy and Meg needs to go back to school tomorrow. So Beth at this point is obviously feeling a little strange about the whole situation and is suspecting something is up. There is a window right there. Use it. So that night, Meg appears to have a breakthrough moment before being subdued by the parasite again. As Beth sleeps in the room with the bear, the parasite begins making its way mouthbound and down, loading up and bugging. Meg apparently has some control over this bug as she says she's not ready yet before getting smacked by Jack. I'm not sure of the bug social hierarchy, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. This hesitation allows Beth to wake up and freak out as she calls for Jack. Jack walks in and tries to calm her by smacking her in the face. It's definitely not the vibe, bro, but the bug has failed its mission, so it crawls back into the teddy bear. Beth begins to realize, maybe something is up with all this, maybe just a little. She gets up in the night, and as she can't sleep, she walks in the living room and finds Marissa and Jack both having something in their mouth. Jack says that she's hallucinating, which is interesting that the bugs are using prior knowledge against those who they've infected. Marissa begins gaslighting the absolute hell out of Beth. Buzzword I know, but there's really no other way to call it. Beth demands Marissa leaves. She does. Beth then tells Jack that he needs to leave, but since he's already enabled PvP, you may just have to pull out the old force multiplier. Mr. Saturday Night Special. After all, there is an old saying, the Lord may have made women and men have different strengths, but Samuel Colt made us all equals. Meg says that she doesn't want Jack to go, but he relents and then walks out into the snow in a t-shirt and very light pants. Very good. Later that night, Meg continues to watch Beth like a creep before going to the door and seeing both Marissa, the therapist, and Jack outside of there just standing. As Meg goes to get Beth for her medicine, Beth declines the medication and decides to go to bed with Meg. Beth begins saying that Meg needs to go back to school and Beth needs to go back to work, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard this before, and that they've all been home way too long. Well, as she does go to sleep, I think Meg basically just gave her like a ton of pills while she was sleeping. So Meg gets up and drags all of her stuffed animals out as Beth sort of stumbles around as she's not doing so hot. As she walks into the closet, she finds this weird shrine of stuffed animals with a central chair for Beth. Jack then appears, smacking her in the head with a metal bar, and this would have definitely ended her, but somehow she survives. Your skull not supposed to take a hit like that. Beth wakes up tied to a bed, except for one arm, which is free, and as the infected talk, they say it's not time yet. Basically, they're just keeping her straight drugged up at this point. As she talks in her current state, she tells Meg that her personality is great and that she knew she would take over the world. Or, maybe you're right. Then we get the usual spiel about being a better mother, her failures, all that. Meg responds by saying she just wants her to be like her. Beth at this point seemingly wants to join the whole famdamly and takes her medication. It looks like she's realizing that something is off with all of them. them. Meg says it's time for her to shower, and as she goes and sits in there, Meg hands her the creepy bear. Also in this movie, like, the music actually literally covers up the dialogue sometimes. It's pretty funny. So Beth gets the bear, realizes there's something in there, and instead of yeeting that bear, she opts to just basically hold it, screech, and then be infected by it. Absolute Chad move. So now she's infected. Later that night, as the family all stares with relatively blank expressions, and also the therapist, the plan is finally coming to fruition. They begin sewing up bugs in all the stuffed animals to continue on their domination of the surrounding area, with Meg finally losing that creepy teddy bear. She goes to eat her feelings in the basement with her mom. Jack has set up a yard sale sign and brings out all the stuffed animals. Meanwhile, Mom in the basement has apparently become a literal nest for these creatures. I don't know, seems like out of all the others, she kind of got the crap end of the stick. So as a family arrives, of course the little girl picks out the creepy teddy bear. As Jack has now become the weird dude, Meg starts to feed Beth so that she can create more, and apparently everything from here is just gonna go from bad to worse and complete crap. What a great Christmas story. So I'm tracking with a line of thought that first and foremost, we should start with what these actual bugs are, then talk about the apparent mind control that they seem to cause in a person, because it honestly appears concerning movement and apparent host infighting for control the entire time that it's not actually just a complete removal of the host, but a more subduing of the consciousness, reduced to basic drives, and then controlled by the parasitic bug itself. So let's get to it. To start, this bug is a eusocial species in some ways, but appears to be much more intelligent than your average insect, as you might imagine. From the quick shots that have been seen, they appear to possess 3 legs per side, so in number 6 in total. They have pincers on the front and antennae more towards the center of their heads. In fact, it's fairly interesting that they have 6 feet and are eusocial, because again, in some ways, this almost shows that there may be a lineage of some sort with ants. Actually, not going to lie, it looks like an ant queen got caught up with a beetle, and this was the outcome. The pincers on the face are much like ants have, except way beefier. Their social structure, their body shapes, basically everything about them would indicate just a beefier ant. The one thing that does not resemble the ants, however, is their clearly displayed intellect. It would appear that these insects have a certain goal in mind, like any other species, and also their propagation. That said, it does not follow the usual pathway that we would expect insects to go. Honestly, while it is a parasite, it doesn't even follow a typical parasite pathway either. This indicates that this is a wholly human parasite specifically adapted to humanity, as it does not desire to end up in any other species, having just used a Homo sapiens as a middle ground, like with what we would expect with another mind-controlling parasite known as Toxoplasmosis gondii, which is my favorite parasite, whose ultimate goal is to infect felines and birds of prey. The parasitic cycle of this specific species appears to go as follows, so that we can make a designation as it being a human parasite and that alone. Somewhere at some point in time, this species entered a person and immediately took over. Upon doing so, we hear the host at the beginning complaining about their stomach hurting and nausea washing over them. It appears that it takes roughly 6 weeks for the parasite to have grown in the host to the point of relatively complete control. But during those 6 weeks, it can be assumed eggs of some sort are laid within the intestines and stomach of a person, or possibly even in the circulatory system. During this time, these eggs will hatch as what we can assume to be the larva based on their apparent insect lineage. Now, the question is, at what point do these eggs hatch? Well, upon being in the intestines of a person or circulatory system, again, 6 weeks has passed, but the mother mentions how just in the last couple of weeks, she's gotten very anxious and attached, almost a point of her detriment, looking for any way to stay home. From this, we can gather that likely the eggs would hatch in roughly about 4 weeks' time, making the last 2 weeks of that stretch a time period where the host begins to be altered by the parasites. Now, this alteration appears to come physically at first, changing the way they eat, but as time progresses, it becomes much more of a mental-based thing, with the cerebrum struggling for control against the parasite as the body is more and more taken over. So, what is happening shortly after this species hatches? The larval stage appears to be critical for this species and its ultimate control of the human body, but even then, it is incomplete. Once the adult has entered the body, laid the eggs, and then ultimately hatched about a month later based on context clues, the adult that originally infected the person still hangs around within the body and exercises control to less of an effect. This may be because of the intricacies of the human brain and its operation. Something as large as an adult parasite that we have seen entering the brain would cause nothing but destruction. There would be no brain left to operate or influence, as any movement would immediately result in necrosis of brain tissue due to compression. So, what is the adult doing during the initial stage then? Well, judging by the fact that when an adult is infected, they are quickly taken over and influenced right away, seeing as they are actually rendered unconscious and there appears to be a fair amount of blood, I would say that this creature is burrowing to a degree inside of the head of a person, but not within the brain case itself, as likely the skull provides some protection from the intruder. However, this does not mean that it is in any way, shape, or form a pleasant experience. You see, right at the back of your throat, if you could see just a few centimeters past that tissue, you would see your spine is right there, acting as a bridge to the rest of your body, relaying commands from the brain and being a massive target for this species. However, there really isn't all that much tissue to burrow into, so it goes to the next best place to house an insect of this size, the nasopharynx. The nasopharynx resides just above the roof of the mouth and to the back, behind the nasal septum. Here, the creature could quite literally reside within the warm, moist area behind your nasal passages. You could still breathe, it wouldn't be blocking your windpipe or anything, and it would only have to dig a very small amount in order to reach the top of your spine, where your brain connects to your brainstem, seeing as it's at the base of your skull. This is why I believe the adult isn't actually entering the brain case, mainly because the brainstem is in the way, and if it destroys that, the host perishes. But the base of the skull creates an area that the creature is also not able to dig into in order to get to the brain, which again, we will get to the larva here in a moment. This area of sequestration would also allow it to exit the mouth and communicate with others of its own kind readily and exchange information, which we have seen them doing on a regular basis. Then quickly retreat back in if another person approaches. Once firmly embedded in this area, the tissue protecting the spinal cord would be peeled away, which is likely done within the first few seconds. The adult parasite has access to the spine and spinal cord at this point. Then, which if you didn't know is actually possible, rendering a hit to the spinal cord directly in any way, more so that high up, can cause involuntary firing of the neural tissue. This can render a person unconscious from mechanical pressure. Any lower on the spine, and this may just result in likely tingling or paralysis. But by applying pressure to this specific area, it allows the parasite to render the host immobile as it descends down the throat and lays the eggs. Once the eggs are laid, it will travel back up and take control of the host to a degree. We see in several instances shortly after the process has begun, such as with the father, the person will snap back to momentarily and wonder why they did something or recognize their actions may have been out of character. This implies two things. The first is that even while the parasite is operating and controlling the body, the host cerebrum is still operational, and because of this, they see what they are doing. The second thing this implies, however, is that the host is not aware of the infection and that they are being controlled, and because of this, it takes them doing something way out of character in order to regain control of their meat suit, even if for a moment. This means that the brain is capable of overpowering the influence of the parasite, but that the parasite is capable of recognizing certain neural patterns within the brainstem that force it to take control once again. The process of taking control once more would likely have to be a chemical application, as the host isn't necessarily knocked unconscious, it's just only some of their original intentions are getting through. For instance, when Jack ends up smacking Beth, there are quite a few emotions and possibilities swirling around in Jack's head at that point. From previous memories of seeing this work to calm others down, to regaining control of a situation, to anger from her not listening. Essentially, the brain will weigh its options and act accordingly as a course is decided upon and the neural firings are put into physical motion and sent down the spinal cord. And I say all this to follow up with, always keep your hands to yourself. However, being intercepted by a parasite, the parasite would likely essentially feel these as it's adapted to human senses, for instance, in the sense of anger, and then react to it in a way that is not normal for our society, but might be normal for bug society. Basically, every emotion, movement, and feeling is focused into the interpretation of an insect and then conducted. Because of this control, a person would begin to act very strangely, incredibly quickly after infection, despite the cerebrum still being in control. At first, a person may wonder why they reacted this way or why they acted like that, but this isn't actually all that strange for our brains to do anyways. The split brain concept can be applied here. If you ever want to know just how strange your brain is, the split brain concept is essentially what happens when the left hemisphere is separated from your right hemisphere. While you are conscious in both, you are you in both, one side no longer has any idea why the other side just did what it did, and they can really no longer communicate because the corpus callosum has been cut. And because of this, your brain will actually make up excuses for why the other side did something in order to preserve its view of reality. If you've ever wondered why you can't figure out your own neurology, it's because of this right here. I mean, think about it. We are literally conscious in both hemispheres, existing, thinking, and viewing the world. But when asked a question that the other side can't directly see or explain, if our brains were to be cut off from one another, it just lies about what the other side is doing. With this in mind, this could be an explanation for how the parasite operates from the brainstem. While the brain is sending signals without knowing it's infected with something actively changing orders sent from higher up, the brain will come up with a lie for itself as to why it did something, allowing the parasite to continue to operate until there is such stimuli that the person is like, wait, hold up. And from there, they maintain momentary control, but even this is fleeting because the next wave of infection happens. But before moving into the next wave, you might be wondering, well, why doesn't the immune system do anything about this? And again, I always bring up the fact that our immune systems are not really that great at removing parasites. We're great with dealing with viruses and bacteria to a degree, but when it comes to parasites, them being larger, our immune systems and our eosinophils and helper T cells just have a difficult time in removing things like that from our body. Eventually, we kind of just end up coexisting with it, which may be why in first world countries we're having more allergies develop because we get rid of our parasites, because it's been shown that possibly parasites calm down our immune systems. Turns out we evolved on this freaking planet and everything is in relation to us, and we can't just be standalone pillars, which totally sucks. Because the implications of that are if we go to another planet, we're definitely not going to be exposed to the same parasites we were on this planet, which could create its whole host of issues. So really the plan is we got to figure out how parasites calm our immune systems and create a medication that does the same thing. Anyhow, with the eggs having grown within the intestines and stomach, they will eventually hatch. It would appear based on what sort of eggs they are, which relating back to ants is a big deal, and we will talk about that in a moment, means that the host will become something accordingly. With your standard host operating under the context clues that this is a eusocial species, this would mean that a lot of those infected are infected with worker parasites or drone parasites. Their job is to prepare for their queen so that she can lay more eggs and become, quite literally, the nest. This is indicated by the mother of the family, as seen with the two families so far, becoming completely inundated with eggs all over their body and used up. And again, there is a reason for this, which we'll go over. For the workers, however, they too can lay eggs, but these are for control of one host rather than propagation of their species. Although, if they do take over a host, they are propagating their species. Exiting their eggs, they will enter the walls of the intestine and stomach, where they would be able to enter the host bloodstream more effectively. It is also possible, again, during the process of laying these eggs, they are just put into the bloodstream and circulate. Once there, they will circulate in the body and all around, as much as like how the mother of the family becomes covered, but unlike her, they will not appear on the surface, instead likely congregating in the brain, either as eggs or newly hatched. This is where we can see a large shift in host consciousness and perception. Once entering the brain, they would bypass the blood-brain barrier either by being so small that they can get through, which a parasite may follow this pathway, which is toxoplasmosis, by infecting immune cells and then entering the brain, or they can force their way out of the circulatory system through the blood-brain barrier and then enter. And the other possibility is they work their way into the cerebral spinal fluid, then enter the brain from there. And considering the adult has access to the cerebral spinal fluid, this could be another method of entering the brain. The method by which they reach the brain and enter isn't so important. It actually comes down to its effects. Once entering the brain, they will begin to influence the host on a more neurological level. The adult no longer has to just maintain control of the host via the brainstem and now can rely on what's happening higher up in the brain. With less issues, the host will take on an almost anoxic brain injury posture. Eyes staring at nothing, mouth open, and they appear to be completely checked out. And this is because a larva would now be affecting the actual firing in the cerebrum. Considering the host can still talk, move, breathe, and maintains muscle control, I would still say the brain is in fact alive and receiving nutrients from the body as well as oxygen. However, the larvae in the brain are now disrupting neural firings of the cerebrum itself, which makes thought and pattern recognition basically impossible, while leaving lower and more instinctual drives intact. This is the perfect way to leave the host alive but still be able to be controlled. This is displayed when the larva would allow normal brain functions to resume when interacting with humans, as not to draw suspicions. But once that interaction is over, the brain is recontrolled and the thoughts are disrupted again, making the host appear almost comatose. This is also why the host will just zone out from time to time, even when another human is around, and then they snap back as literally thought is restarted and allowed to continue. The second possibility of infection is what we have seen with the mothers of the group. They appear to be infected by a different type of parasite. While it is able to do exactly what the others do, basically it is the same species, so that's not really, that surprising. They in turn cause the infection to spread much different across the body. And this is why I believe it is possible the eggs are laid within the circulatory system as well, as when the mother is infected, egg pods will develop in the skin and all over the body. She is continually fed sugar by the worker versions of the parasites who have infected their host body, as she will create more and more worker parasites. So then, what's the difference? Well, we have discussed this before, but again, eusocial species, which means that they have a queen of some sort, and instead of going to mounds of dirt, they just instead treat human bodies like mounds of dirt. The queen will go off and have a new colony arise from one that branches off from the original colony, which in a lot of cases is exactly how new ant colonies are formed. Basically, these creatures, while considered a parasite in us, really are just beefy ants. The queen structure creating a ton of young, the ability for workers to lay eggs still, but to be different in their effects, and the eventual new queen that will go out and begin a new colony all line up perfectly. So then how does this process work? Because after all, this is a science channel and anyone still listening is here for the knowledge. It's known as haplodiploidy, and this appears to be very present within the parasites, and this also runs in ants as well as other forms of insects. Now, this isn't to say an ant mound cannot really have just multiple queens, as this does happen from time to time, but this is your typical breakdown. You have a queen who is a diploid queen. She will undergo meiosis and create haploid eggs. With the addition of royal jelly and haploid sperm, she will create another diploid queen. Meiosis is the recombination of genetic material that makes sperm and eggs go from diploid to haploid, just for your information. Now, the ones who do not get the royal jelly but receive haploid sperm will become diploid workers. These diploid workers are capable of reproduction by laying eggs themselves and having haploid eggs. Now, these haploid eggs, though, will not be fertilized by any of the drones. So haploid eggs themselves, whether coming from the queen or diploid worker, will become these haploid drones. Whether the egg is fertilized or not, it will progress regardless. These drones, in terms of parasites, would mean that the larva that is laid, if it falls under the same idea as haplodiploidy, and considering the person is usually infected with one parasite, means there is nobody in that person's meat suit in which they can put Percy in the playpen with, and that means that the larva that original adult who infected the human will have larvae who are haploid drones and will behave differently than your diploid worker or the queen. The eggs produced by the queen are likely fertilized and as such will react differently and present on the surface of the body, likely because this will allow them to be successfully fertilized by other haploid drones in order to produce more workers and subsequent drones a generation down. All this contributes to the nest being formed from the person who has been infected and explains why there are different jobs depending on who you're infected with, as in nature, haploid drones have different jobs than diploid workers who have different jobs from diploid queens. So now the real question is, where does this species come from and what is its ultimate plan? Well, taking a look at ants, for instance, we typically regard them as just lowly insects, but the reality is, in terms of survivability, they rival, if not surpass, our own skills. A study released from researchers at Arizona State University and Princeton University put it pretty succinctly. Ants can accomplish a task more rationally than us. And because of this, ants should likely be respected. Now, extrapolate this out to a species that arises either on Earth or elsewhere that can communicate directly with another by clicking their pincers together, and that also appear to have an established language much like we do, and that would be very bad news for humanity. But the problem is the way they spread is much too slow, and it would be too easily identified by somebody who is not totally hopped up on pain pills. But because of what we typically see on Earth, I would hesitate to say that this arose from anything currently residing on Earth, as if it did, then this would have been more predominantly spread and likely would have rendered humans as nothing more than cattle by now. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that this insectoid-like species would have something of a space program, as they do not seem to have the ability to use the tools necessary to do so. But if they should have infected another species from somewhere else that had a similar anatomy to humanity that may have been further along in the technological scale, then this may have been an invasion not so much from the infected species, but from the parasites controlling them. And if you take into account that any planet that has gravity, bones supporting the base of your skull rather than muscle supporting the back of your skull will typically result in a smarter species, as the brain is able to grow as it's supported by something where muscle attachment points won't affect the skull. So this hypothesized species that may have been infected likely would have a brainstem, likely would have a spine that these things would be intimately familiar with. All that said, we haven't seen any evidence of alien activity or crashes, but for this species just to pop up out of nowhere and have the ability that it does would indicate that it's not a naturally occurring species on this planet. It must be an invasive species, which presumably suggests it comes from somewhere else.